Hi, welcome to the quiz. You will be presented with multiple choice questions, each displayed on screen for a short time. Please make sure to attempt answering all the questions. Quizzes help us to reinforce our knowledge, identify areas where we need to focus more, and improve our overall performance. Taking quizzes can also help to increase retention and make the learning process more engaging and enjoyable. With that out of the way, you can answer along on quizalto.com. The exact URL of this quiz will be in the notes down below. Let's get started. Good luck. What is a webhook in the context of AWS CodePipeline? An Amazon VPC subnet. An AWS IAM policy. A mechanism to trigger a pipeline execution based on events. A type of AWS Lambda function. When using AWS CodePipeline, where are pipeline artifacts stored during the pipeline execution? Amazon DynamoDB, Amazon RDS, Amazon S3, AWS CloudWatch. What is a pipeline in AWS CodePipeline? An AWS IAM policy. A workflow construct that defines the release process. An Amazon S3 bucket. An AWS Lambda function. What is the typical role of AWS CodeDeploy in AWS CodePipeline? To store application source code. To monitor AWS CloudTrail logs. To deploy applications to a fleet of Amazon EC2 instances. To manage AWS IAM roles. Which AWS service is commonly used as an action in AWS CodePipeline to build your application's source code? AWS CodeCommit, Amazon S3, AWS CodeBuild, AWS Lambda. What is the purpose of using AWS CodePipeline alongside AWS CloudFormation? To manage Amazon RDS databases. To automate infrastructure provisioning. To create Amazon S3 buckets. To monitor AWS CloudTrail logs. How does AWS CodePipeline handle the source stage in a pipeline? By retrieving the latest revision of the source code. By performing static code analysis. By triggering AWS Lambda functions. By monitoring Amazon VPC flow logs. What is the purpose of using AWS CodePipeline with AWS Elastic Beanstalk? To manage AWS IAM users. To automate application deployments. To monitor AWS CloudTrail logs. To create Amazon S3 buckets. What is the typical role of Amazon S3 in AWS CodePipeline? To host static websites. To provide data analytics. To store pipeline artifacts. To manage AWS IAM users. What AWS service is commonly used as an action type in AWS CodePipeline to invoke serverless functions? AWS RDS, AWS Lambda, AWS EC2, Amazon S3. What is a common use case for AWS CodePipeline? Monitoring Amazon S3 buckets. Creating Amazon EC2 instances. Automating software release pipelines. Configuring AWS IAM policies. What action type in AWS CodePipeline is used for deploying applications to AWS Lambda functions? AWS CodeDeploy, AWS EC2, AWS CloudFormation, AWS Lambda. What is an AWS IAM role used for an AWS CodePipeline? To provision Amazon EC2 instances. To grant permissions to perform actions within the pipeline. To manage Amazon RDS instances. To configure Amazon Route 53 DNS records. What is the typical role of AWS CodeBuild in AWS CodePipeline? To build and package source code. To deploy applications to Amazon EC2 instances. To configure AWS IAM roles. To manage Amazon Route 53 DNS records. What is the typical role of AWS CodeDeploy in AWS CodePipeline? To configure AWS IAM roles. To manage Amazon CloudFront distributions. To monitor AWS CloudWatch logs. To automate application deployments. What AWS service is commonly used for manual approval actions in AWS CodePipeline? Amazon SQS, AWS Step Functions, AWS IAM, Amazon SNS. What is an Amazon CloudWatch events rule used for an AWS CodePipeline? To manage Amazon EBS volumes. To monitor Amazon RDS instances. To configure AWS IAM policies. To trigger pipeline executions based on events. What is a common use case for AWS CodePipeline? Monitoring Amazon S3 buckets. Creating Amazon EC2 instances. Automating software release pipelines. Configuring AWS IAM policies. How does AWS CodePipeline handle the source stage in a pipeline? By monitoring Amazon VPC flow logs. By triggering AWS Lambda functions. By performing static code analysis. By retrieving the latest revision of the source code. What is the typical role of AWS CodeBuild in AWS CodePipeline? To manage Amazon Route 53 DNS records. To build and package source code. To configure AWS IAM roles. To deploy applications to Amazon EC2 instances. What is a stage in AWS CodePipeline? A logical collection of actions. A type of AWS Lambda function. A security group in AWS. An Amazon EC2 instance. How does AWS CodePipeline integrate with AWS CodeCommit? As a source provider. As a database service. As a machine learning tool. As an email service. What is the typical role of AWS CodeBuild in AWS CodePipeline? To build and package source code. To deploy applications to Amazon EC2 instances. To manage Amazon Route 53 DNS records. To configure AWS IAM roles. How does AWS CodePipeline integrate with AWS CodeBuild? As a managed Kubernetes service. As a database service. As a serverless compute service. As an action provider. Which AWS service automates the build, test, and deploy phases of your software release process? AWS CodeDeploy. AWS CodeCommit. AWS CodeBuild. AWS CodePipeline. And that's a wrap. Thanks to everyone who participated. Remember, you can answer along on quizalto.com, where you can keep track of your progress and find much more quizzes. We hope you had a fun and challenging time. Until next time. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel for more. Hit the bell icon to be notified as soon as we upload. Please leave a comment if you have any thoughts or suggestions, and if you think this video is worth sharing with someone who could benefit from it, please forward a link to them. See you next time. Thanks for watching.